Welcome back. This is Ethan from 115 Gaming, your home for all the tips and strategies you'll find to improve your matches of 6 Siege the board game, and other games. Eventually. Today we're going to be taking a more in-depth look at the strategies for the defenders in 6 Siege. The defender side is a completely different way of playing and thinking about the game, so knowing good setup and strategy is key to playing this side of the game. We have divided this guide into 3 sections: team composition, setting up the site, defending the site. Part 1. Team composition. Just like with the attackers, there are specific roles that your defender operators will fulfill in a given match. The defender roles are a little more broad due to the nature of the game and the limited number of operators available at the moment. While this is subject to update with the game's release, we have found 2 roles for the defenders as of now: anchors and roamers. Anchors are the operators that you'll station in the site room in order to hold that room. These operators should be the ones with the best close quarters range weapons. Operators that can reliably eliminate an attacker who gets into the room with a single die roll. Place these in the site rooms in positions that cover as much of the room and as many of the entrances as possible with an Overwatch token. Roamers are the operators you'll place around the map in the other rooms. These are the flexible ones. Their job is to keep the attackers from entering the building, blocking off parts of the map for attackers who do, and being able to rotate back to the site room to help defend if the attacker breaks through. These should be the operators with more flexible weapons that can, on average, be decent at most ranges. As with the attackers, try and synergize your operators' gadgets and abilities when composing your team. Part 2. Setting up the site. Alright, now we get into some real differences, because unlike with the attacker, about 50% of your work in this game will take place in the prep phase. As the defender, you are in charge of setting up the map, deploying gadgets, and putting down your operator/decoy tokens everywhere. Everything you do in this phase will completely determine the course of the entire game, as the attacker will have to develop their strategy entirely around how you set up the map. Don't take this phase lightly. This is your chance to fully utilize the advantage of being the defender. There are 3 areas of focus during your setup: map setup, gadget placement, and operator token placement. Map setup is where you can rearrange or remove up to 5 items that start on the board. Use this time to put fortified stairwell tokens on spaces that are closest to the site. You don't want attackers to have a free entryway spot into those rooms. Take cameras and put them in the objective rooms, and more importantly, in rooms that you think the attacker will most likely enter the building from. Put up barricades on doorways and hallways that you think the attacker will move through. The idea here is that you either want to slow down the attacker as much as possible by forcing them to burn through your placements, or that you force them to enter from an easier entrance that you can overwatch. Gadget placement is also key. Any operators that have gadgets in the setup phase will have to be placed here. Use these gadgets to reinforce the sites, but also to cover the difference of the building's gadgets, putting them in rooms you weren't able to in the map setup phase. Put mute jammers in the site rooms or the common entryway rooms. Replace key barricade emplacements with castle's reinforced walls. Anything that makes it harder for the attackers to easily enter the site rooms is good. Try and place the gadgets in places that are harder for the attacker to shoot at from a window or doorway. Don't make it easy for the attacker to shoot these gadgets. With these 2 setup phases, you're trying to create where the attacker has to come from, or you're trying to burn the attacker's actions as much as possible if they choose a direct entry into the site room. However, make sure that you do not block the way for your own operators to move between sites and rooms with the placement. Always leave pathways open to yourself to be flexible in your defense. Operator token placement is last up on the list here. At the beginning of the game, each of your operators is represented by 2 tokens, a real operator and a decoy. You put both down and all of them are overwatching. This part of the setup gives you an advantage over the attackers by giving you more information than them. Our first piece of advice here is to make sure that you put all of your tokens in viable spots, even the decoys. I know this seems obvious, but often the tendency at the start when you're first playing the game is to place your real tokens first and then just throw your decoy tokens somewhere. But you need to make sure that you're putting every token in a good spot, so as to confuse your opponent as much as possible. Secondly, don't be afraid to put the decoy close to the real operator. Sometimes, having the decoy and the operator in the same room but facing different directions can be just as confusing as having them across the map. Third, don't deploy the real operators in bad spots just to confuse the attacker. It doesn't matter how confused your opponent is if your operator is out of position for the rest of the game. Fourthly, designate zones. Something that can be useful is to designate zones on the map during setup, basically segmenting the map into pre-portioned sections, and then assigning operators to each section. This way you're not pursuing enemy operators across the map with one operator. Each operator has their zone, and if enemies come into it, then it's their problem. Fifthly, don't deploy too many operators in one site room. Usually having 1 to 2 operators per room is more than enough to hold down a site. Deploying too many operators to a single room makes you incredibly vulnerable to flashbangs, grenades, and flanking. It's often better to exercise control around the bomb rooms rather than the room rooms themselves. That being said, it is also never a good idea to just leave a bomb token undefended. Sixthly, and finally, deploy at least one operator upstairs. At this point, we're beating a dead horse. We've talked numerous times in the last few videos how advantageous the upstairs are. They're even better for you, since you can automatically start with characters there. That means you can overwatch entryway spaces, and also immediately drop down from the upper floor on a moment's notice from the first round of the game. Especially if the attacker puts his back to a stairwell spot in the first round, you can drop down and get an easy kill. This also just lets you adapt and rotate earlier in the game if the attacker does something unexpected in the first round. Part 3. Defending the site. With most of your work done, now it's time to sit back and let the attacker come to you. Here are some leading principles when defending during the game. Firstly, think about defending in this mindset. Your job is to waste the attacker's time and actions, not to get aggressive. Secondly, activate fewer operators on the first activation so that you can get a more accurate idea of where the attacker is focusing his push. That way, you can move your forces to hold the attacker there as long as possible. Thirdly, utilize the stairs. We've already talked at length about how useful the upstairs are. They're good for adaptability, but also operator gadgets. Especially Pulse, his gadget is incredible in the upstairs. Fourthly, use all of your traps and gadgets. If you have operators like Jaeger and Kapkan where you have to choose when they go off, use them as soon as possible so you don't forget them. Using these gadgets burns the attacker's time and actions, which is key in the early parts of the game. Fifthly, ping the attackers as much as possible. The ability to shoot at operators through walls if they're pinged is a great way to get the drop on the attacker. Usually at least one of his operators will get pinged by a camera. Don't let that kind of opportunity go to waste. Either shoot through a soft wall or throw a smoke grenade and shoot him through that. Operators like Pulse are also great at locating/pinging the attackers. Sixthly, rotate back to the site in the attacker's push. Once the attacker makes a big push for the site, that's the time to pull your roamers back to the site to flank and take back the objective. Don't leave your anchors alone in the endgame. Finally, you can go outside for a good flank. This is a move that the attacker rarely sees coming, but as the defender, you can go outside. Sometimes the attacker has everything in the site overwatched, but if you can quickly duck outside and then come back in behind the attacker through a window or doorway, you can get an easy kill. And that's our guide for the defending players in 6 Siege, the board game. With these tips and strategies, you should have all the tools you need to keep the attacking player away from the objective. Thanks for watching. In the near future, expect more videos covering 6 Siege. We're planning operator, map, and gadget breakdowns, gameplay videos, and gameplay analysis videos, and much more, as well as covering additional games. You don't want to miss out, so subscribe for more. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.